Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, even from the depths of the Toronto International Film Festival, which is thankfully running in person once more, if you're within the sound of my voice, you must be in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming you do. You're listening to us right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Google. It's all good. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would really appreciate it. You can also find us on the social media, as the kids are calling it. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, it's important right now too, cause especially during TIFF, because we're pumping out a lot of reviews of a lot of interesting stuff that has been playing the Toronto International Film Festival. Please visit us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, the moving image in general, basically, because we love to talk about it and write about it, and we love it when you come and read about it. So please stop on by. And speaking of the Toronto International Film Festival, notice my subtle segue there. We're talking about a film that is playing there, and it is a wonderful film called Wildhood from writer-director Bretten Hannam, and it's the story of a two-spirit Mi'kmaq teenager by the name of Link, who is discovering and sort of asserting his sexuality and learning who he is as a person when his already volatile home life goes from bad to worse. It literally goes off the rails. His abusive father just loses it after the cops bust Link and his half-brother for stealing scrap metal, and around that time he found out that his mother, who he thought was dead, might actually be alive. So Link, he sets fire to his dad's truck, and he hits the road with his half brother. And it's while they're on the way, they encounter another drifter named Pasme, and who shares Link's indigenous roots and offers to help him find his mother, but Link has this real sort of mistrust of people, and I mean, is it gonna ruin what he's trying to do? Is it gonna ruin this new relationship he's forming with this drifter that he found? And it's a real interesting play on the road movie genre and sort of the coming of age drama, but it puts it in sort of the Mi'kmaq territory, and it gives it a very sort of honest and indigenous feel to it, and it's really a wonderful film. And we got to talk with writer-director Bretten Hannam about sort of the inspiration for the story, casting, and just sort of trying to make sure a story like this comes off as honest as humanly possible. And it's really a fascinating film that I think is very true to not just sort of the coming of age genre and trying to and being honest about discovering yourself, but also about being indigenous and trying to discover yourself at the same time, which is not always the easiest thing. But if you get a chance during the fest, please give Wildhood a chance. I do believe there is one digital window left for it this coming Friday, but enjoy our talk with Bretten Hannam. It's a good one. All right. Well, first off, I mean, just congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed it. It really is. It takes us on a powerful journey, and I guess my first question for you is just walk me through the origins of the story.
Sure. I've been working on the script for over a decade at this point. In its production, it was a lot by my own life, looking for a community, learning and connecting. Over time, thankfully, there's a distance through development sharing with community this story. So it's not really, directly based on my life anymore, thank God. But it's certainly inspired by those events, even if they're one step removed. And then a lot of the other elements come from conversations with family and friends and community members over the years, and them sharing different parts of their journeys and their stories, and always, of course, making sure if I'm going to use an aspect or element like that of someone else's story, to make sure I have permission to do it. But essentially, that's kind of where it came from and grew from, and then I feel like it's changed shape at every level of collaboration, right? From when we went into filming, to work actors, to now.
Yeah. I mean, this feels very much like like a bit of a road trip movie about sort of discovering oneself and just sort of, I guess, maybe connecting with identity, which I'll admit, as a straight white guy, I don't necessarily, that's not necessarily something I immediately identify to, but it really was compelling. And especially with the, your lead, Philip, who is just fantastic in the role. Can you talk a little bit about just, I guess, maybe the casting process to find the right people for this? Because I mean, it's really a fantastic performance.
Yeah, we cast pretty wide, looking for the leads. We actually were doing Zoom auditions before everyone was doing Zoom stuff. That was the first time I had heard of it. So we had gotten some tapes from both Philip and Joshua independently. Philip plays Lincoln, Josh plays Buzzamai, and they were really good. And then I was like, okay, that's great, but you really have to do a chemistry test. Like, you really have to see the leads together, especially in a film like this, where the dynamic between three leads, really, it can make or break literally everything. So they happened to be I think they were in Toronto, maybe, or Ottawa, and their schedules kind of lined up and overlapped a bit, that they were able to then, they were physically able to go into an audition together, and we were kind of on the other end on Zoom, just to see like what chemistry was between them, like how open they were to working with each other, like, and how they would interact, really, and what was going on. And we watched it, and I can, maybe it's a cliche thing, but it's usually in the first like 30 seconds, I think, for me at least, that I'm like, this is the one, these are the guys, yes, these are our leads. And then, being like, yeah, okay, great, I feel really good about that. And then, of course, there's a longer process to get into camera, but that was for our casting. Yeah.
Now, I mean, for me, because I mean, especially in watching this film, it seems very distinctly different, because we've had a couple of sort of high profile Canadian kind of coming of age stories in recent years, but this feels very much like a bit more prescient, because I mean, these two young men were potentially running. I mean, they were obviously running away from abuse, but they were running very much into the unknown in some ways, if that makes any kind of sense. And I'm kind of curious, for you, how important was it to have, I guess, maybe a sense of stake sort of in the film, rather than be just sort of kids being kids and trying to discover themselves? But it's like, no, these two could potentially be in some serious danger if things don't necessarily go their way.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up kind of in the 80s and 90s, and I remember a lot of movies back then. If you watch them, they're a little darker than what comes out now.
Right.
And that sense of danger is one of those qualities. I mean, there's also some goofy special effects and stuff.
Right.
But that kind of edge to things, I think, is missing in a lot of coming of age stuff that is coming out more recently. And to me, that's something that makes it more grounded in reality, because there is a danger to it. There, like, you don't just, grab your brother and run off in the night and have like a really succinct plan of what's going on. There's not going to be any danger. There's not, like you like you said, it's the unknown. You have no idea of what's out there. It could be quite dangerous. And really, it's by moving together and being a family, being a pack, that these guys are able to kind of survive and make their way forward. But if they were alone, it would be a totally different story.
No, for sure. And I mean, it's one of those things because as I was so drawn into their story and sort of worried and concerned, and, as the film develops and everything goes on, I was so struck on the opposite side of how absolutely gorgeous the film is. Can you talk a little bit about just crafting? I mean, I guess how you wanted to make it look visually, because I mean, there is the elements of shadow and dark, but at the same time, it looks the film looks like $1 million.
Yeah, that's our cinematographer, Guy Godfrey, who is incredibly talented, amazing eye for everything. And when we were planning out how we were going to approach things, there was a sense of like having the camera be, there with these characters as they move through the land. And the land itself is very beautiful. There's parts of it that you never get to see really in film out here. When you think of Nova Scotia, it's typically the craggy coastline, which is beautiful too. But there are so many elements to explore. And then, with Guy basically behind the camera, everything looks good. So that's a bonus. But then he also has this superhuman ability to not only kind of be very sensitive and tap into the scene and like feel the vibe of what's going on. So the camera is always in a great place. But he also has this weird ability to squeeze into spaces that I don't know how he fits in, just to get the camera right where it needs to be. So largely, it's Guy's talent that's really bringing out the beauty that's in the film.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. It's a gorgeous film to look at, but I mean, it's such a great story as well, because obviously, while we're obviously, seeing the story of Link and him sort of discovering himself and his sexuality, there is this issue of heritage as well. And I mean, I think as an outsider looking in, we've never really had a chance to appreciate or understand that, yeah, that those can be issues too, especially when you're of that age and not understanding and how and trying to sort of find your way in the world. How important was it for you to sort of have those issues of heritage sort of play a part in their journey down the road?
Well, all of those elements are all kind of attached and together in a circle, right?
Very much so,
They
yeah.
don't, yeah, they can't really exist independently of each other. So by touching on one aspect, you touch on all of the aspects. You can't really ignore them, ignore like one part for the other, or I don't think it makes a very realistic experience to do that. So that's being growing up disconnected from your heritage and your community is unfortunately a common story for a lot of people, a lot of Indigenous people that have varying circumstances that make that disconnection. And then everyone has their own journey and their own story, finding what that way back is, or what the way to reconnect is. And so in this story, I mean, we did it through like a road trip type aspect, and there's a lot to the way that Link learns over the course of the adventure that is more in line with kind of like stuff I learned or how I learned growing up, or how people learn in our community, right? There's a lot of listening. It's not a lot of lectures and you know um, finger wagging and stuff like that. There's some teasing, there's some scolding, but then there's people doing things and by example, right? And there's just a general welcoming and openness to like engaging with things, even though maybe he's pronouncing words wrong in the language, or he's not quite this or that. There's still kind of room because he's learning and it's understood. So that aspect, it was super important, and the language as well, super important to include. And we had a lot of help from the Wabanagi Two Spirit Alliance.
Yeah.
To help with those aspects.
Well, and that's so good, because I mean, there really is such an importance for I mean, and this can be applied anywhere, but for people to learn, sometimes they just have to figure it out. And I mean, I think that's a great lesson to sort of put out there in the universe, whereas, especially in media and pop culture these days, we get sort of these predetermined paths or clear cut ways of doing things. It's like, it's not necessarily going to work for everybody. Sometimes you just got to sort of get in the middle of it and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, life isn't nice and neat the way that a lot of people want it to be.
Yeah.
Or black and white like a lot of people want it, or even a binary of any kind.
Right, exactly.
And it's like a dynamic, growing, changing thing, and people's identities are growing and changing and shifting all the time. And that was part of this this character, and these characters, I guess all of them.
No, just sort of have that openness to identity. Absolutely. No, and I mean, I think you displayed that really well in the film. And I mean, it's such an important thing to put across. And I mean, just to transition a little bit, and this is a bit of a goofy question, but something I always like to ask, like, can you think back to sort of your younger days? Like, was there a movie or a moment in your life that made you want to be a storyteller or made you want to be a filmmaker? Like, what was sort of that sort of light bulb moment for you?
I don't really think there was one in particular. I've always told stories. I've always been creative, like making art and things. From the time I was like super, super little, like I remember being 3 and rolling across the floor covered in newsprint paper and paints. So that's how early I can kind of remember. As far as film goes, I remember watched a ton of film when I was younger, but I didn't really see any films that had any gay characters, any queer characters at all. Certainly no Two-Spirit characters. And Indigenous characters were usually people that were not Indigenous in Westerns, like in the background or something. So that wasn't awesome. But then along the way, as I started to kind of like watch more movies and learn more how the world worked instead of just being in the forest, I started working on smaller projects, and I left my home when I was a teenager to go and study in the city in Halifax. And part of what I studied was animation, but also included was film. And I was like, oh, I kind of like film. And then I went to NASCAD and ended up studying it. And I was lucky to have a professor there that was very instrumental in like giving me a ton of movies constantly to watch and scripts to read. So that really is what encouraged me, was, other people outside of me that saw something and were saying and encouraging me to step into that.
No, I mean, I think just to start putting a bow on this, because really, as more people get to see this, I think the one thing that's going to stand out for a lot of people is just how, from a narrative standpoint, nothing that happens in this film is hitting the audience over the head. It's not trying to make a statement, or it's not trying to do this or do that. It's really focusing on character and really allowing us to sort of understand not just similarities, but differences that we all have across the board in terms of when it comes to sort of being self-aware in our own terms of self-discovery. And I'm kind of curious, as more people see this, like, what is your hope for audiences? Just to have more conversations, or just to have more focus on the individual as opposed to sort of the label of the, is it queer, is it binary, is it this, is it that?
Yeah, I mean, so I live in Gaspukwit district of Ulnoegidi, which is also called Mi'kma'ki, which is also called Nova Scotia, this part. And this part of the land is governed by what's called peace and friendship treaties.
Okay.
And the peace and friendship treaties lay out kind of a groundwork of respect and building bridges between people, and they apply to everyone, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, in this territory. And that's really what's at the core of this story: is building bridges, coming together. It's gone through this long period of time where we've all been isolated, we've all been apart, but really we are better together. We all have strengths and knowledge and lessons and teachings, all of us. No one person holds all these things. So to be able to come together respectfully and understand each other, or at least make an attempt to understand each other, that would be my hope, that this film does something good, that it brings people together in some way, even if it's that's just around a screen for an hour and a half.
Right. But you know what? I think you've done that and then some. And I mean, it's a beautiful film, and just congratulations on making it into the festival. And thank you so much for the time today. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.